Welcome to Pigeon Racing World with Winners One. I'd like to also welcome to the show from Sydney, Stephen Eggleton. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey Rod, how you going?
Also in Brisbane we have David Christensen. G'day, David.
Hi Rod. Hi viewers, and g'day Stephen. Stephen, it was good to catch up with you recently in Sydney.
Yeah, good to see you again, David, and it was good fun in Sydney.
Stephen, you've been involved with pigeons for some time. When and how did you start?
Yes, I guess I was born into pigeon racing. My father had pigeons. In fact, my father actually won a pigeon race the day my parents were married, much to my mother's dismay. But anyway, so I was born into pigeons and had them through until I was in my late teens, and then I had a fairly long gap.
Did your father race in Sydney?
Yeah, no, we grew up on I grew up on the central coast of New South Wales. So up around, I was born at Long Jetty, and we raced in the Entrance and Wyong clubs over that period. We moved to Sydney when I was 12. So we raced when I was 13 and 14 together, and then when I was 15, my father and I flew in Blacktown Pigeon Club. And Blacktown, in those days, Cumberland had about 600 flyers, and Blacktown was a super club, and they had 40 strong members. So I wanted to race in the big club when I was 15, and we were lucky enough to win the club championship the first year we went in there against the great Trevor Steed and many other top flyers. So I think that goes to show that, you know, when you've got a keen 15-year-old, you can sort of kind of do anything.
That was fantastic. What pigeon lines did you race in those times?
Yeah, when we moved from the Central Coast, my dad had his old family of pigeons, but when we wanted to race in Blacktown Club, coincidentally, I met a chap called Eddie McCarroll from Seven Hills Club when we first moved to Sydney. And after 2 or 3 years of knowing Eddie, when we decided to race in Blacktown, Eddie said to me, he said, "Stephen, if you're going to race in Blacktown with the big boys, you need some more ammunition." So Eddie was kind enough to give me 4 pairs of breeders, and those 4 pairs actually turned out they were actually hand scenes. They were dark checkers, blue checkers. You paired them together. There were blue bars and dark checkers. You paired them together. You got these smoky blues and checkers, and they were the pigeons that did the damage for us. So they were lovely pigeons. They were perfectly put together. They were fast pigeons, but they were endurance pigeons as well. So you could race them all the way through to 500 miles, no problems.
Was your father pleased to see you return to pigeons later in life?
Yeah, so I didn't really get back into them until I was 40, and I was living in the UK and had been in the UK for about 12 years, I guess. So no pigeons in that time. When I came back to Australia on occasion, when I used to visit my dad, I used to see the birds, and the same with my uncle. So he was back on the Central Coast in those days. He was racing on the Central Coast. My uncle was racing on the Central Coast. And he was thrilled when I got back into them, much to my wife's dismay, because we've been married for 12 years or more, and she didn't even know much about that I had pigeons when I was a kid. So I got the bug back and had a couple of seasons in the UK before we moved back to Australia.
We'll get back to talking about the UK in a moment, but you mentioned that your uncle raced as well.
Yeah, Uncle Ian, the last few years whilst they were in the Central Coast and just before I moved overseas, they were more or less living side by side at North Wyong on the old Pacific Highway. So they were funny brothers. It's a bit like those 2 grumpy old men. I guess they couldn't live with each other. They couldn't live without each other. They were great mates, but they used to bicker all the time between the 2 of them, and they used to swap pigeons, and then they'd complain to me that, you know, Uncle Ian's got this bird of mine, and Uncle Ian would say to me, "Your father's got that hen of mine," and it was so funny. And they were great mates, and they did pretty well. They were hobby flyers, but they popped up and had some good results. My dad got second in the Union National when I was overseas, and I was lucky that when I gave him some pigeons before I left that I started putting back together, but then I moved overseas. I gave him those pigeons, and that was a pigeon that bred for him, or those pigeons bred for him his second Union National from, I think it might have been Wollumbar on the north.
We'll be back after this short break with more of Stephen Eggleton's interview. Stephen, in what part of the UK did you race?
I went over on a 3-year business contract. I moved to Shropshire, where I lived was just, it's sort of northwest of Birmingham. So it's about 40 minutes past Birmingham. And it's about 3 hours northwest of London. So I went over there for 3 years. And after a year, I got promoted and I was made a director of the company. And so the 3-year plan sort of went out the window. In the meantime, I met an English girl and we married, and so I stayed. And as I say, I've been there for about 12 years. And we lived in the countryside in Buckinghamshire near Aylesbury. And we're lucky enough to find a Victorian barn conversion. We converted it. I had a nice garden backing onto fields as far as you could see. And one day I was cutting the grass and this small mob of pigeons were coming across the field. I turned the mower off and I stood there, and these birds were getting closer and closer, and they came right over and I could almost touch them into a headwind. And I went, come on. And got the tingle down the spine, went inside to my wife and said, I'm going to get the birds back. And she said, okay, what does that mean? And so she thought I was going to get one of those dovecotes, the stick with a couple of birds in it. And so 6 months later, it all started to happen. I did 6 months of planning, and then we put the young bird loft up, which was 16 foot long. And then a little while later, we put up a 24-foot widowwood loft. So it was a bit more of an ambition than what she had first anticipated.
And what line pigeons did you keep over there?
Well, that's a good question, because I did 6 months of planning. Where I lived was about 120 miles from the coast. So there's a lot of inland racing in the southern part of England. So I needed speed pigeons for that. But then when you step across the channel, you needed middle to distance pigeons. And I wanted distance pigeons that could sprint as young birds as well. So it took me 6 months to decide what I was going to get. So the sprint pigeons I got were Staff Van Riet's. They're Bert Hesse and Dave Allen, Staff Van Riet's. And Bert and Dave, they were the first ones to take the staffs into the UK. And so they were my speed pigeons. And then I got these Belgian pigeons from these people called Foch brothers. They're from the Walloon region of Belgium. Not very well known, but they had some superb pigeons. And what I liked about them is that the distance pigeons sprinted as young birds. And then as they got older, they matured and they could do the distance. But unfortunately, I was only able to race. The first year was young birds. The second year, the whole racing was put on hold because of foot and mouth disease, so I missed out there. And the third year, I raced young birds again, and we did really well in the young birds both times. And the last year was fabulous because I had them on the dark and had them fully prepared for the first year I raced. We did very well in the first few weeks, but then they fell apart, and I didn't know about the dark. So, and needless to say, the local guys didn't tell me either, because the joys of pigeon racing.
What was the main differences you found between racing here in Australia and in the UK and Europe?
Well, you start with young bird racing. And young bird racing is at the end of the season. So you don't start racing until sort of kind of the beginning of August, and you've got about 8 weeks of racing. And then at the end of September, the season is turned, and the birds have already started belting out their flights and going through a heavy molt. So young bird racing over there is very much like our racing here. So I think Australian flyers would do very well over there in young bird racing. I did pretty. I mean, my first race, I got first and second club, second and fourth fed. I was told that I'd never win a race where I lived. And the third week we topped the fed, and we did really well. So that sort of shocked them a little bit, because it was an invitation flying club with 25 or so members. And the only way I got in was because I was an Aussie. They didn't think we raced pigeons in Australia. And also the fact that I had pigeons when I was a kid. So they thought, well, this guy's not going to be a problem. And where I lived apparently wasn't a very good spot either. So again, all the nuances of pigeon racing. So that was quite fun. But young bird racing is similar to here, but old bird racing is completely different. They're racing in the summer, we're racing in the winter. They're flying pigeons on a widowhood system. The widowhood system is fabulous. When I got back to Australia, I raced a semi-widowhood in a small setup in St Ives in suburbia in Sydney. And I'm a huge supporter of, I never send a pigeon to a big race that's not motivated.
When racing widowhood, have you found it to be a lot more work?
Yes, there's more work, but it's time. So time probably equals work. But I've been in my new location now just 4 years. Where I lived in St Ives in Sydney, they built 5-story apartments up against my back fence. So after we'd been there probably 12 years, we decided to move. But I only had a very small setup. And in that setup, I had 2 cock sections, and one of the cock sections had 12 widowhood boxes in it. And so I raced my first round young cocks in there with a dozen or so old cocks. And that was very easy to manage because I didn't have many pigeons. One year on the north, I won the short average in Ku-ring-gai with 3 2-year-old cocks on widowhood. And all 3 of them were triple winners. And I won the Fed 2 birder. They came together. I won the Fed 2 birder from, I think it was Kempsey. So you don't need a lot of pigeons. But where I am now, I'm living in more of a rural area, and the peregrines, I had a bad peregrine situation where I was before because I was next to a national park, but I could work a small team. Whereas I am here, you can't work 30 pigeons because they just get smashed, and the pigeons just struggle the whole time. So you've got to have a bigger team and work them to work and fit in with the peregrines. So it's very, very different racing. Here in Australia, it's very different, and every part of Australia is very different as well. I mean, everyone has got issues, whether with neighbours or with peregrines or whatever the case may be. So you need to adapt or die. I mean, you've got to plan and develop your system to fit in with the time that you have available, and success will come.
Our race season has young birds and old birds together in an 18 to 23 race program. How is it different in Europe?
Yeah, no, in Europe they have the same number of races. So you have old bird season for about 12 to 15 weeks, and then you've got 6 to 8 weeks of young bird racing. So that's sort of kind of, we race more or less the same time. Like the time we race in Sydney is the sort of more or less the same time they race in the UK and also mainland Europe. But obviously we're the opposite time. We race in winter and they're racing in summer. They race mostly natural system, and on the widower. When you're racing pigeons, you can do roundabout. You can do so many different things over there. Jealousy system, double hens to one cock. There are so many things you can do, and just understanding how people do it. And I've got some good friends over there, and I learned a lot in a short couple of years, but I've maintained my relationship with many of the top flyers. And the Wildermeersch pigeons that I raced when I first brought into the UK, and I crossed a couple of Hubans from Glenhaven stud. I was lucky enough to get a superb daughter of Sinaloa when paired to Ace's Jewel. and she became my number one hen. And then a couple of years later, I was able to get a sister to her from Vince Pettivoli. He was very kind to let her go to me. And those two hens were freaks. And so those Wildermesh pigeons were just spectacular pigeons. And they came from a family called Corkett and Son in Bedfordshire, in Leighton Buzzard. And those pigeons were just machines. So it was all about temperament. They were fast thinkers. They didn't want to go with the herd. They would break and go by themselves, and that was all good. But again, the peregrines, front runners get beaten, get belted.
Can you give us an insight to your results in Australia?
So the first 12 years or thereabouts, I raced in Ku-ring-gai Club in St Ives. It was only a fairly small club, but it was a strong competition, and you can only beat what's in front of you. I mean, we had some good flyers, and the birds I had prominently were the Wildermesh, the Hubans, and I had a few Yostene and travestied pigeons that I raced further on. So the first couple of years I did okay, and then I won the club championship 8 years in a row. In the last 2 seasons I was there, only raced half seasons because I was in the moving process to come here where I am now. So yeah, we did okay. We won the Youngbird National. We won the ring race a couple of times. We had third in the Youngbird National. So we had some. I think we won 68, had 68 firsts and 64 seconds in club races, and topped the Fed a few times, and top 10 many times. So it was fun racing in St Ives. I mean, we started the season with 30 old birds and 100 babies, and that was maximum capacity in my little garden loft. So I was racing competitively against the big boys with many more birds than that. Yeah, so I moved to Glenorrey, which is near Dural, 4 years ago. So my setup is it's bigger. So I brought the race loft across and extended it. So I'm on acreage, so it's good for the birds. And the pigeons I've got now are quite different. I've still got some of my old birds, but I introduced, I got 3 grandchildren of Olympiad. So I've got double barrel, I've got August, and I've got the Augustus and August. So I've got the 3 of them. Put them into my Hubans, so they're the pigeons I'm doing well with, the speed pigeons. Topped the Fed from Capity with a hen called August Angelina last year. And then in the last 5 years, since I won the Youngbird National, I wanted to win the All-Age National, so I put a plan together and I brought in more than 20 direct imports. And those imports, there's 3 waves. The first wave came from 400-mile pigeons from Mark Gilbert, and then I brought some pigeons in from the Netherlands, and then I brought some more pigeons in more recently. So I was lucky enough to win the Queen's Cup last year, and so that was a bit of a cunning plan sort of come together. So the Gilbert pigeon crossed to an old Aussie pigeon. I paired them together. A Dutch pigeon paired to an old Aussie pigeon. I put them together, and then I put the youngsters together, and I bred my national winner. So it was all part of a cunning plan, and it all sort of fell into place. So I was very lucky. And to win a Queen's Cup or the biggest race when the parents of that bird are only yearlings, you're quite fortuitous. Here we are, 3 Fed winners, Northwest 2020. Come on, Dennis.
Here's a clever girl. Right. Here's the winner. Here's good girl. Good girl. Come on.
So I'm lucky enough today to be handling Angelina. So she's one of my birds. She's 2011 rung now. So she got second fed from Dubbo, 5,500 pigeons or thereabouts. She got second fed from Nevertire and won our Club Young Bird Derby All Pearls jackpot. And I sent her All Pearls to $100 in the Young Bird National, and I got two together. She hit the board first, and I said, come on, and she nodded to me, and the other hen went past her and beat her by 2 seconds on the clock. But I won the Young Bird National by 4 minutes, and she won All Pearls to $100. And she's a champion breeder as well. We've just handled Angelina, and she's been a freak, not only racing but at breeding. So this is a hen that this is off Angelina. This is August Angelina. So the father's the grandson of Olympiad, and Angelina, whose mother is off my #1 Hoopen pair. And this hen is all about speed. So she topped the fed last year, 5,500 pigeons from Capity. Only 1 hour and 15 minutes on the wing, but all speed, absolute magnificent pigeon. And this year I bred off her, and the youngsters look fabulous. So this is the Champagne hen. She topped the fed last year from Duralambone, so it's 500 k's or thereabouts. And she was first 2,500 pigeons by 6 minutes, flying about 1,300 metres a minute. She also won the Punch Bowl 10k race, and she's very closely related to the last hen, but she's got the Euro blue blood in her pedigree to draw out a bit further. Champagne hen. This is Lizzie. She won the Queen's Cup last year in CCF, which is the all-age derby. It's a 5-bird limit from 600 k's or thereabouts, just over 600 k's. She was on the wing for 8.5 hours. She raced 2 weeks before and got 7th fed from Byrock, and raced 2 weeks before that from the Young Bird Derby by default. She wasn't going to be in the team, but I scratched the Champagne hen to put her in the Punch Bowl race, which was a double-header weekend, and I clocked her from that as well. It was a bit short for her. So she's magnificent. She's 2019 rung, and her parents are 2018 rung, bred for stock. So both grandfathers are new Euro imports.
Yeah, g'day guys, Richard Clement from the NCF Federation in Newcastle, flying partnership with my father Malcolm up here, and just wanted to comment today on a product that we've been using over the last couple of seasons called Protein Plus, which we sourced from Winners One in Victoria. Protein Plus is a product that we started using in our stock loft as a trial product a couple of years ago. We were interested in how we could ensure that when our youngsters had those last few days in the nest before they went into the race loft, and as they went into the race loft didn't lose any body and condition, and we found that the product was particularly helpful with that, and we were very happy with our first trials. We used it then a little bit more in the stock loft and found that over time our pigeons, particularly as they went into the 3rd and 4th round of breeding, weren't losing body and were still in really good condition at the end of the breeding season, so that was really a positive for us in the first year. Last year we used it in the race loft for the first time. We found it to be a really good product to help put condition back onto the birds and to help the birds build back up a little bit quicker than what they probably previously would have, without having to change their feed base too much, particularly early in the week. We've had a pretty successful couple of years up here, winning multiple club and combine and federation averages, and last year particularly was a record-breaking year for us, and we put some of that success down to the fact that we've been able to use this product consistently now, and we'd have no hesitation in recommending it for other flyers who want to try and aid that recovery period, particularly after a hard race or a hard toss.
What's the general background of the pigeons you imported from Europe?
So 5 years ago or thereabouts, I was in the UK. I go to Europe, well, pre-COVID, I was going to Europe at least a couple of times a year because of work. And I know Mark Gilbert very well. And I said to Mark, I said, look, I want to win the 400-mile all-age derby in Cumberland. And I said, what do you got? It was September time. And he let me in a loft with 40 squeakers. I said, I want 4 pairs. I went in and I came out and I had 7 pigeons in a basket. He then pulled out the book. We went through what the 7 squeakers were, and 4 of them were the same way bred. And they were off a hen called Karen. Now, Mark Gilbert's wife, her name is Karen. And Karen the pigeon got second international 500 miles, 11,000 pigeons. And she was a freak. And the pigeon that beat her was her loft mate, a pigeon called Melissa, which is the name of his daughter. So the 4 youngsters I got off Karen, those pigeons are the ones that are doing the damage for me, and I cross them to other pigeons.
I noticed in Sydney, when you're grading the pigeons, you liked a certain type of pigeon. Is that what you look for in your stock birds?
Yeah, selecting pigeons for my own use. I guess the fact that I was racing with my dad for the first, growing up until I was 19, the pigeons were more or less his pigeons. And if I didn't like a pigeon, for whatever reason, bad luck, So when I got my own pigeons, the pigeons are in my loft are pigeons I like. So the pigeon has to have, firstly, a very good temperament. Anything that's wild won't be in my loft. They've got to be a good temperament. They've got to take the eye. And then when you put them in your hands, I'm looking for an engine. I'm looking for conformation. I'm not a boatie. I'm not a boat person, but basically the pigeon, if it was a boat, it needs to be able to be buoyant in side waves, front and back. You need total buoyancy. And in Australia, the way we race, in particular where I live now, you need pigeons that are smaller and can cope better with the peregrines. So I like a pigeon that can be walking around the floor in the loft and can fly up onto the top perch and do a bit of a somersault almost to get to the top perch, as opposed to stand there and have to do a straight line. And some of the older style pigeons have to do that. So you need pigeons that can adapt to the environment, and I'm looking for pigeons that have got a real engine. So when I put a pigeon in my hands, I sort of know. So sometimes you might have seen from the video, I may be looking at the pigeons a bit quicker than the other guys, but I've judged quite a lot of shows over the years, and if you've got to judge 150 pigeons in a given time, you sort of kind of know pretty quickly how the pigeon's put together.
Are you working with your current imports to cultivate your own family, or do you still bring in 1 or 2 new birds every year?
Yeah, no, I'm lucky enough to have more than 20 new imports, and some of them are only 2 and 3 years old. And now I'm just going to start blending those together. I've also brought some marathon pigeons in to blend those to the Dutch pigeons, so they'll be all-day fly 1,000-kilometre pigeons. So I'm sort of looking to go a bit further. In St Ives, I didn't have the capacity with the loft or anything to do much more than sprint and middle distance, whereas I can go middle and longer. I'll be on the lookout for 1 or 2 new pigeons to go into mine. At the moment, I don't have any gabbies. I haven't been able to get any decent gabbies. My mate who lives down the road, I haven't been able to extract any from him of recent, ever. I wouldn't mind putting 1 or 2 good gabbies into my team, but there's 1 or 2 in the pipper sale that I quite like, and we'll see what happens with that.
Loft designs have evolved over the years. How have you seen these changes in Europe and in Australia?
Yeah, loft design is a very special topic. The loft design is crucial, and everything to do with the loft and how your birds are managed in the loft, and they need to be in that same environment going from the loft to the race, and then when they're let go, they're liberated. So transportation of pigeons is crucial, the welfare of the pigeons is crucial, and you want your birds to be taken care of in the same way they would be taken care of in your own loft. My loft is fairly unique, I guess. When I moved back to Australia, my loft design in St Ives was very European. The few people that came to my place in St Ives, they said, "How can you raise pigeons when your loft faces south?" I said, "Well, it's either facing south or I can't raise pigeons. I was in a small yard. We had big trees on one side. We had no direct sunlight on the loft, and we had a swimming pool 4 or 5 meters from the landing board. So everything was against us, but I created an environment in that loft. And my wife used to say, when I used to travel all the time, she'd go in the loft and she said it's warmer in the loft than it is in our house. And I had the whole roof opened up with fiberglass to try and get some sunlight in there. So my pigeons only got sunlight when they were in the air. Whereas in my new loft, because I'm in a position where I can face it the right direction, the loft is very conducive and the birds love it. So I'm already getting pretty good results out of the new loft. One thing you've got to be careful of with closing up the loft is ventilation for both you and the pigeons. I'm asthmatic and I have to be really careful with dust with the pigeons. So my loft is very much designed with cross-flow ventilation when I'm in the loft. So when I go in, I've got a window in the back, which gives me cross-flow ventilation. Either end of my corridor, I've got windows. So when you're in the loft, I want to be in the race loft. It has to be as healthy as it possibly can be for me, because it's all about the pigeons. But you know, if I can't be there with them, or the fly can't be there with them, it's a problem, isn't it?
The Australian Racing Pigeon Journal has been an interesting educational read since 1993 and still a significant way to keep abreast of the sport of pigeon racing. In each exciting monthly magazine, editor Jeff Howe brings together Australian and international articles. Join pigeon fanciers throughout the world who subscribe and enjoy the Australian Racing Pigeon Journal. Loft visits, training tips, pigeon strains, as well as health advice from world-renowned avian veterinarians are regular topics featured in this great read. There is nothing better than keeping a quality magazine on the shelf to read anytime.
I've observed in many lofts, even in very cold climates, the use of aviaries.
Yeah, no, aviaries, the idea of aviaries in Europe, I sort of understand. I visited many lofts in a fairly short period of time when I got the bug back. And you know, you go over there in winter time, and I'm sure a lot of flyers have been to Europe in winter, and you've got these pigeons out in an aviary and it's like 2 degrees, minus 3 degrees overnight. So they're weathering those young pigeons. And you know, they come out the other end and they're tough as. Similarly in Australia, I mean, the pigeons love being in aviaries, they love being in the sun. And so yeah, I know I've got big aviaries on my breeding loft and my stock loft. So I'm a big supporter of light and air is crucial for pigeons.
Racing in Sydney, what's it like?
Racing in Sydney, it's a hotbed of competition. Central Cumberland is the main federation, and we've got some fabulous flyers in CCF. So you know, people are incredibly motivated and committed, and you know, it's best pigeons. I mean, people, however they do it, they get hold of the best pigeons, and so you know, you could bring anyone from overseas, and they would get a really big shock trying to race. And I'm sure it's in other feds across Australia, but I mean, racing pigeons in CCF is red hot. You know, we challenge ourselves. We do things that we do. We race a different direction every year, and when overseas flyers come here and they talk to us about it, they think we're completely mad. But we race a 5-route cycle, and you know, the way it's set up now is on a wiper system, so we can't go from south to north. So sadly, I mean, I won the Federation Young Bird Derby in 2012 on the Northwest in St Ives from my old loft. And I won the Queen's Cup last year off the Northwest, but that was from 2012 to 2020. So we had to wait 8 years to fly the Northwest again, which, my pigeons were old in between, So, I think probably we should race just, 2 or 3 routes off a westerly, southwesterly, northwest direction, and to be fairer for everybody. And then the pigeons can get some flock memory. I mean, I like training pigeons to give them what I call IP, so intellectual property. The birds have to learn, and if you take them from south to north and, southwest to northwest, your old pigeons, you're wasting an opportunity there. So if you want to train your pigeons, you should be helping them get better and better. Flock memory is important. I mean, the guys that race across the channel, I mean, you talk about Mark Gilbert or any of those top flyers over there, the idea of chopping them around every 12 months is just crazy.
There's a growing movement to go away from racing different lines and one route like overseas. Would you like to see this in the CCF?
Yeah, I think we could find one direction. I mean, everybody could get a fair crack. I mean, for example, if we went due west, for those who know Sydney, if you go due west, I mean, basically, if you wanted to early on in the season, you could do a 2-part liberation. You could do southern part and the northern part of the, north of the Great Western Highway and south of the Great Western Highway. You could do all sorts of things, but then we come together and we race, due west. And, one weekend there might be a southerly blowing, so the guys in the north will get an advantage, and the next week there might be a nor'wester blowing, so the guys in the south get an advantage. But everyone gets a crack. If it's a headwind, the guys at the front will have a bit of an advantage. If it's a tailwind, the guys at the back will get an advantage. So I think there's enough of a mix up there if we try and, even get it down to a narrow 3-route cycle in Sydney as opposed to a 5-route cycle. This is all around the welfare of the pigeons. I mean, I'm sitting here now, it's Friday afternoon, and I should be getting ready to basket tonight, but we've got a holdover because we're racing north this year, and the other guys that are racing in Sydney tomorrow off the west, they'll be racing.
I want to tell you a little story about my best pigeon, Gladiator, the Olympic pigeon and national ace bird for my loft. Yeah, that weekend he won the 2nd prize, so he became Olympic pigeon and national ace bird. In the year 2000 I bought a pigeon voicer in the club here from Jules Sampermans, and this was the papa of Tiesto that I bought there. Also we raced this pigeon that we bought as voicer, and he won 2 times the first prize on Bourse. Then we bring him to the breeding loft and he bred us famous pigeon Tiesto.
In 2017 I made my restart in the pigeon sport, and I decided to build my strain around one specific pigeon, Finn, and also of course his parents. So my second base pigeon in the loft is Ricky. Ricky is related as well to Finn because the mother and himself are cousins. Ricky was my first national ace pigeon since I raced with the pigeons in 2014, and he was also very successful the years afterwards, so he was 3 years in a row in the top 6 in the PIPA ranking on the long distance races.
I started with my own birds in a small loft in 1995. It was a loft by 2x2 only. I lived with my mother. It was for me also easy to get into the sport in a short period. Good pigeons also, because we were related to several guys who flew on a high level. The most famous name was, of course, the Huben family. 2004, Queen L, our basic hen, she won first national on La Souterraine. Was about 600 kilometers. She was fastest against 19,000 pigeons, old birds and young birds together.
Ik ben Nicolas Gijzelbrecht en ben gestart met Pipa in 2000 als nieuwswebsite. En in 2008 ben ik dan begonnen in het klein met Pipa Elite Center. Dat was met een koppeltje duiven en dat één koppeltje zijn dan meerdere koppels geworden. En in de loop van de jaren zijn we zo wel geëvolueerd. Beslist hebben met ons drie dat een duif maar verkocht mag worden als wij vinden dat die goed genoeg is voor onszelf, voor de eigen kweek.
We now have a national body in Australia, and you've been involved on that board. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, the Australian National Racing Pigeon Board. Yes, that was established some years ago now. I was the inaugural chair of that. That came about because there was a need. Canberra were wanting, through Animal Health Australia, to put codes of conduct, best practices in place for all different pets and birds and dogs and goodness knows what. So I sort of volunteered to get involved with that for 2 years. I'm a very busy guy. I'm director of many companies, a number of companies, and I run a big French automation company, building automation company. And but I'm committed to pigeon racing, and I want to ensure that we're able to race pigeons in 10 years' time. So I was the inaugural chair for the first 2 years. We set it up, got it up and running, and we achieved what we set out to do. Unfortunately, within a year or so of it being set up, rotavirus came into play. And so basically, we then needed to get involved in supporting the need for a vaccine. And the end result of that was a vaccine was actually developed. So, you know, the Australian National Racing Pigeon Board probably was formed 100 years too late. I mean, we should have had a model in Australia similar to the RPRA in the UK. And, you know, we are very decentralised in a lot of things that we do in Australia. You know, the state governments are very strong in what they do. I mean, the federal government does their thing, but we are, as a country, we're quite decentralised, and same in pigeon racing. It's a thankless task in any administrative role in pigeon racing particularly. But no, we did a good job, and the guys who were there are still doing a good job. There are some knockers, but you know, it is what it is. The future of our sport is important around making sure that we're welfare centric, and you know, that we can live in harmony with you know, people who have different views around animal health and well-being of in our sport. I mean, this is our sport. We love it, and people are passionate about it. So that's why people get hung up at times.
In the future, what direction would you like to see the national body move towards?
Well, the national body needs to get elevated to another level. But basically, all of the big feds need to come together, and you know, it's trying to get anything done in harmony in an environment where there's competition is a challenge. So the problem in our sport is that many of the people who want to get involved, it's a thankless task, and so therefore people, you know, don't step up, which is very sad. So when I got back from overseas, I mean 17 years ago now, the first year I raced back in Cumberland, we had a smash. So I was our club delegate, and I went to the Fed meeting and said, well, I stood up on behalf of our club and said, can someone share with me why we let the birds go on the weekend? And so then, you know, I was a bad guy because I asked the question. So then I found myself volunteering to be chair of the Central Cumberland Welfare Working Group. So basically what we did, I put a group of people together, people who were, you know, it was an action group, not a committee where people sit back and do nothing. This was an action group. And we basically wrote the Liberation Protocol for CCF. We got the CCF transporter third party approved to carry 7,000 pigeons, so that one day if someone came knocking on the door saying, you know, can you say to us that that is certified to carry those birds? We can say yes, it is. We put a liberation protocol in place, and the birds are not let go in bad conditions outside the protocol. So it was the first thing we did. So that was the original motivation. And why did I get involved? Because I wanted to be able to race pigeons in 10 years' time. So it was like an insurance policy. Step up and get on with it.
What do you think federations can do to promote the sport, and what can they do for the new flyers?
It's a challenge to find new people to get into our sport. I mean, there's lots of innovative ideas, but I think, you know, I'm a business guy. So if you think about cost of entry to get into a market, you know, if you want to compete in a marketplace, I mean, I think to get into pigeon racing these days, it's very expensive. And, you know, I've helped people out over the years, and, you know, for new flyers, it's really hard. And there's no handicap system. I mean, you know, I laughed. There was a guy who came, and he's a very nice chap. I won't say his name, but he came into Ku-ring-gai, and he hadn't raced for many years, and he started flying with us. And he said, Jesus, he said, I was like someone who's just come back to play golf, and they're going around playing a round of golf with Tiger Woods. And that's sort of an example of new flyers have to compete directly with some of the best flyers in their local club. And it's very, very hard. So, you know, we need to consider flyers. I mean, it's becoming too hard. I guess that's the whole thing. So we need to take some of the pain away. You know, it's an aging membership, and the baskets don't get any lighter to carry. And so I think cost is important. Making more fun. I mean, you know, team environment, have more fun racing pigeons, and I think we'll get more members. You know, we love our sport, we love our pigeons, and I think there's a lot of opportunities with different cultures, you know, newer Australians. I mean, some great flyers, Chinese flyers, and other nationalities that are coming. They're really keen on pigeons in Australia, so we should encourage that. So I think the best thing that feds can do is, junior programs are great, but I think if we should encourage more and more new flyers, and encourage novices to get involved.
We noticed that no federations put money aside to promote the sport. As a businessman, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we need to promote the sport, but I mean, who does it? You know, you then need to get people involved to promote it. And you know, I think we were in a better place 10 years ago. I think just more recently, it's a tough place. You've got people who are just so competitive. I mean, they just want to be competitive. They just want to raise pigeons at all costs. And so, you know, the federations are spending more and more money on labour and paying people to do things, because people don't want to do things voluntarily anymore, because it's all too hard. And I think that's very sad. So I think it's a really a big opportunity. If you've got to have workers in your club, you've got to have workers in your fed, you've got to have a general vibe and positive attitude around what we want to do. You know, getting together and having a laugh. I mean, you know, I think back to when I was a kid. I mean, my father and all his mates, they're always together. And I mean, I remember I raced partners with Billy Escott back in, I think, 1979. And I never drunk so much beer in my life. I mean, we used to have so much fun, and everything was about pigeons, and we need to have more fun with pigeons.
Yeah, I must admit, my friends in China and Europe love to get together for a meal and drinks, have a bit of fun, and just talk about pigeons.
Well, we're talking about fun. Blackpool in the UK is a once-a-year event before COVID, and it's a great place to have fun. A couple of years ago, one of my mates, Mark Jeffrey, dear friend, Mark Jeffrey from Liverpool Club in Sydney, he'd never been to Blackpool. I was lucky enough to be many times. I said, come on, let's go. We went. We went and saw some flyers before we went to Blackpool, and we were fortunate enough to be sort of in the clicky group with Mark Gilbert and all the guys from Windsor and all his club mates, and Roger Lowe from who's a dear friend of Mark's, and we just had a ball. And we were the Aussies, and we were with all these Brits, and then all these European flyers were there, and then there were they call these moot sessions where you get all these specialist flyers, and there were some extreme long distance flyers from Belgium, from the Netherlands. We were there, and we were talking to everybody. We met Yelly Yalema and all these champion flyers, and it was just so much fun. And I caught up with some old friends. I caught up with the Corkett boys, and lots of red wine and beer and whatever was consumed, and it was great fun. So yeah, I mean, you just need to get people together, and everyone else can do the rest. So it's nothing like talking about pigeons, having a laugh.
In our intro to starting up, we have a little bit says bring back the fun, and so I totally agree with you, Stephen.
Yep, exactly. And I get why did I get back into pigeons? Part of it was for about my my I guess mental health and my relaxation. I mean, sitting in my loft and sitting outside my loft on a Sunday morning while my birds are having a bath is, for me, is great relaxation. And that's the fun about pigeons. You are the breeder, you're the trainer, you're the jockey, you're the vet, you're the everything. And when I won the Queen's Cup last year, and Vince Pettivoli said to me, he said, it's great when a plan comes together, and that's very true. But it's also good fun. I'm a trap, trust me.
I know I can't beat you on a bloody trap. Look, I'm going to change my loft.
Does your conveyor still work?
Yeah. What, do you have a conveyor and take it straight in?
No. Conveyor for the pigeons.
Can you show us that working? Yeah, but you got a conveyor?
Yeah. Okay, go in the back and put this way. So that hen there, the Lubar hen, she's a Lubin hen with yellow. Yeah. Hey, the blue hen there. This is the wildebeest pigeon, the dark one, and the blue bar. Sorry? No, they're just sitting on some eggs at the moment. You're in the back also, Loft? Yeah. Well, I've just changed it. I've just moved the boxes forward.
So what's behind there? Is it a hallway or is it?
Yeah, it's just a hallway. So come around this way.
The secret men's business for the guy who tops the fares.
She bred the gunning fed winner to beat you.
Oh, thanks.
He ran second fed.
I ran second in the fed. Hey, you ran second in the fed, you can't beat the club.
This is the one I can.
You can't beat the club, What do you reckon, huh?
This hen here,
I don't have any pigeons
she's
like
off
this.
the Dunny Do, the first one I showed you. Yeah. And the big
How do you compete?
Oh, yeah.
How do you compete?
Yeah. She's a beautiful hen. And I fed her back to the hermits.
3, 4, 1, 5 weeks later, he thought he had to take one. That's why Pigeon was congratulating.
Grandson of young artiste in Australia. So this is direct from Hoover. So he needs to have his beak trimmed, and I'm pairing him up at Christmas time. Oh, 6. So
210.
yeah, she's a mother of 210. She's a mother
Who
of
was the
210.
father?
I can grab the pedigree. I can't think.
Eric?
It's Eric or the other one. The father could be Eric. His first youngster I bred off him, I bred for stock. Sorry, I bred for stock. And then we were moving. And then we sold our house to a developer. They're going to knock our house down and do stuff. And then they said to us that they're going to delay it 6 months. So Vince said, it was the end of March, and Vince said, why don't you race? I said, I've got no pigeons. They had 12 babies. So I went to the stock loft and pulled the old hens out. And his son was a late bred from the previous year, never been raced.
Yeah.
He won race 3. Anyway, they're just 2 old ones. He said the best one in the yard.
I'd like to thank you, Stephen, for coming on Pigeon Racing World Winners One to share your experience.
It's a pleasure, Rod, and I hope everyone got something out of this. So, yeah, it's been fun, and I look forward to catching up with people at the Pepper auction, which should be a great day.
And good night, David.
Good night, Rod. Good night, viewers. Good luck, good racing and good returns.
You've been watching Pigeon Racing World Winners One. I'm Rod Simmons. Good night.